So from Genesis through the entire Passover story, it's all Torah and it's all instruction, but it's framed in more of what we would call historical events. Once the Torah is completed, I shouldn't say it's the first one. Last week, after the Sinai experience, last week we had a smattering of most of the Torah portion was a smattering of civil laws. This week, it goes into the laws of putting up the tabernacle, constructing the tabernacle, service in the tabernacle. It'll be over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and in a way, over the next 5 weeks in different ways. So this week doesn't have any real narrative to speak of, but we're going to find something here. Parsha overview, Truma. The people of Israel are called upon to contribute 13 materials: gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, and red dyed wool, flax, goat hair, animal skins, wood, olive oil, spices, and gems, out of which God says to Moses, they shall make for me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell amidst them. On the summit of Mount Sinai, Moses was given detailed instructions on how to construct his dwelling for God. It doesn't say that in the Torah, but it does give the instructions, so that it could be easily dismantled, transported, and reassembled as the people journeyed into the desert. In the sanctuary's inner chamber, behind an artistically woven curtain, was the ark containing the tablets of testimony engraved with the Ten Commandments. On the ark's cover stood 2 winged cherubim, hammered out of pure gold. In the outer chamber stood the 7-branched menorah and the table upon which the showbread was arranged. These are temple tabernacle accoutrements, and eventually, when the tabernacle, after hundreds of years, when the Jews came to Israel, and hundreds of years later, they established, King David and King Solomon established the temple. That was a large, permanent version of this tabernacle, which was like a mini temple. In the outer chamber stood the 7-branched menorah and the table. I said that. The sanctuary's 3 walls were fitted together from 48 upright wooden boards, each of which was overlaid with gold and held up by a pair of silver foundation sockets. The roof was formed of 3 layers of coverings: tapestries of multicolored wool and linen, covering made of and B, a covering made of goat hair, C, a covering of ram and tachash skins. What's a tachash? That's a debate. Across the front of the sanctuary was an embroidered screen held up by 5 posts. Surrounding the sanctuary and the copper-plated altar that stood before it was an enclosure of linen hangings, supported by 60 wooden posts with silver hooks and trimmings and reinforced by copper stakes. Okay, so this is all not riveting story narrative, but it's Torah. Now we're going to get into something a bit more. I mean, it's all Torah, and we can drill down and find something relevant and interesting and everything. We're going to do all in one part of this. And as a staging, I want to look at the first week, the words of the Torah portion. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and have them take for me an offering. From every person whose heart inspires him to generosity, you shall take my offering." The language doesn't say to speak to the Jews and have them donate, have them gift to the tabernacle. It says take it. Obviously, it's something, don't take it against their will, but there's something odd and therefore likely instructive in the language of take it. You will collect the following offering from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson wool, linen and goat hair, and ram skins dyed red, tachash skins, and acacia wood. Okay.
Does it say anywhere why God needs this material things?
Oh, for sure. That's a whole study. That's it. Each one of them can be analyzed. But the point is that this is a representation. The tabernacle is a representation that God can be found in the physical world. Your home, this is a template for what you should be having your home and your office, making a sanctuary for God. And each one of them has what their indication is. We're not going to get into all of that now. We're going to focus today on the acacia wood, not the symbolism of it, but some of the symbolism of it. not why God needed acacia wood, but this a specific nuance in the acacia wood. Let's take it. So Rashi says, acacia wood. He asked a very simple question that the child might ask. Where did they get these trees in the desert? They're out there. What are you doing with it? Where are you getting the wood from? So Rashi quotes sometimes, we know the Medrash is. The Medrash is homiletic interpretations of the scripture. Often they're very important historical and psycho-spiritual insights. But they usually don't have relevance to the just plain understanding of the text. Rashi only brings quotes from a medrash if he feels it makes it flow easier for the child. Yeah.
Going back to the previous page, what is Takashi?
I mentioned that before. What's a tachash? There's a debate in the Talmud as to what it was. It's not the topic we're going to be today. So, the Rabbi Tanchuma is a rabbi of the Talmud, and he had a medrash. He has a very, very well-respected compilation of traditional, of homiletic teachings, and Rashi does quote from him, as from like the medrash in general, but from his often. He doesn't usually mention his name. It's at the end he'll say the medrash says, and then he'll put in a parenthesis sometimes Tanchuma. But here he brings him front and center for us and for the 5-year-old child. Rabbi Tanchuma explained that our forefather Jacob foresaw prophetically that the Jews would build a tabernacle in the desert. So he brought trees to Egypt and planted them. He instructed his children to take them along when they would leave Egypt. Okay, he didn't, assuming that they didn't have acacia wood trees down in Egypt, they weren't native to the land. So not only did he could have brought seeds, it would be easier than bringing trees. He brought trees, and because he foresaw that hundreds of years from now, there would need to be in the desert, the Jews would be enslaved, they would be freed. In the desert, they would need to make a tabernacle, they're going to need acacia wood. So he says, guys, let's take these huge trees down with us to Egypt, get some wagons, because we're going to need this. We have to replant them in Egypt.
Is there a proof that he was thinking that further was just okay? The grandpa Jacob had some relics he brought in. Let's use it.
We don't usually have proof of anything that the Talmud tells us what was going on in someone's mind.
Right.
So this is what our tradition is. It's beautiful. What does that have to do with the 5-year-old? That's kind of a stretch.
I think this is a stretch.
Yeah. Now, even if we look at the Medrash and say, so splitting of the sea is also a stretch. If God could split the sea, create the world, take this Mount Sinai, things can happen. But why does he have to insert this here? There were trees. They got trees. How did they get trees? I don't know. There's something. What's his issue that he has to go so far afield from normal linear thinking to bring this up for the normal flow of the Torah? That's the question. And we want to delve into it and find lessons in it. Before we get into it, you can see that there are less fantastic explanations. Text 2, great Spanish rabbi, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra. He says, he quotes Rashi, and he says, some of our predecessors explained, text 2, explained that our patriarch Jacob planted these trees. No, took trees from Israel, took them down to Egypt, replanted them, and the Israelites brought them out of Egypt with Moses' instruction. Now, we don't know if this was transmitted to our predecessors by their answers. No, I'm sorry. We don't know. I'm sorry. If this was transmitted to our predecessors by their ancestors, we too should accept it. It says, how do we know? Well, we don't know. This is Jewish tradition, accept it. However, not that Rabbi Ibn Ezra is arguing with the idea that Jacob had this premonition and this vision and plan. Saying, to understand the verse, it's best to seek a different explanation if this is merely their theory. Saying, if that's the way it was, that's the way it was. If it's a theory, I got a better explanation. We suggest there was an acacia grove near the Sinai desert. When they arrived at Sinai, Moses informed them they would pause there for a long time. They were at Sinai for almost a year. And when they and at Sinai is when they first built the tabernacle. They built the tabernacle in view of Mount Sinai, in the Sinai desert. So there was a grove, an acacia grove. There was some type of an oasis. And they would, at that point, they would cut down the trees to provide enough wood for everyone to build a hut and for the leaders to build large courtyards. They weren't in tents; they were in little huts, and they had wood, and there was acacia wood, and they used that for the tabernacle. That's what we can tell the 5-year-old, and that's what the Torah means in its smoothest interpretation, plain interpretation.
So what are we telling the 5-year-old different story that we tell to adults?
That's not that. It's a Rashi, using Rashi's phrase, which I mentioned numerous times. Rashi's goal is to explain this, that even a 5-year-old just has, the narrative makes sense. And he's only going to comment if there's a question that even a 5-year-old would have. Definitely a 50-year-old also, but even a 5-year-old. A 6-year-old and a 60-year-old. Okay, so Moses instructed them to build the tabernacle. Yeah. So yeah.
So
Rabbi Ezra says if Rashi wants to make this, we're assuming Rashi's commenting because a person, whether 60 or 6, can raise their hand and say, "Hey, how did they get wood out in the desert?" So Rabbi Ezra says, there was an acacia grove.
So we have 2 explanations, and they're totally different, right?
Correct.
And we should accept.
Welcome to Torah.
And which one should we accept?
This is
Based on my age.
again. Welcome to Torah.
So when I'm 5,
So Rashi, we're trying to understand Rashi's perspective, and we're trying to understand Rashi's perspective and the depth of it, not just in the flow of it. So this. First of all, just about every verse in the Torah, you're going to find different rabbis differing. That's not new.
Mm-hmm.
Here, the point is to underscore where that Rashi was reaching kind of far for an explanation to allow this to go. You have a Rabbi Avraham Eben Ezra, who's just a century or 2 later, said you got an easy answer. So the answer is that they had. They found an acacia grove. Moses instructed them to build a tabernacle after Yom Kippur, several months after they built their huts, and by then they had plenty of available wood.
But Judaism prides itself on logic, and Rashi pulls this thing out of, as you said, left field, way out of left field, and no proof of any kind that Jacob was involved in having this wood that so many 100 years later was transported to Sinai Desert.
So just to go with your premise, Judaism prides itself on tradition and faith and logic. And when the Torah tells us that sea split, we use our logic all we want, but logic is not going to totally get you there unless you want to go say it was a tsunami or something that just happened to hit at the right time. We have faith in God. And we have faith in things that go on that are beyond our normal ken. We also we try to use logic as much as we can because God gave us logic and told us to try to use it. In the understanding of the Torah, we want to find something where the narrative makes sense. Sometimes Rashi finds the need to rely on traditions, even if it's miraculous traditions, because kids can accept miracles more easily than adults do, to allow the verse to flow. So in this case, Rashi, in order to explain the wood, for some reason, which we haven't yet divined, found it necessary to jump to this kind of off the normal run explanation of Jacob's vision instead of taking something that would be much more rational. Okay, fine. Now, even to understand that, if you look at text 3a, the Torah tells us that when the Jews were in the deserts, it says they arrived in a place called Elim, and there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms. So the idea of Ram Evan Ezra's idea that there could have been trees and an oasis in the desert, the Torah itself says it. Not there, but there were other ones. That is not such a miracle that there was an acacia grove in the desert. It could have happened. So the Ram Evan Ezra's explanation makes sense. Why didn't Rashi think of that? Why did he have to go so far afield? Another thing that we find in the Talmud, text 3b, there were items that merchants from the community of the nations would sell to them. We find that in different issues that the Talmud says that when the Jews were wandering through the desert, they came across different tribes. They were able to buy. They were bartering. They were buying things. Maybe they were able to buy wood. So the question is, why? What forced Rashi to go in this direction? So first thing we find is, let's go to the strange language of take from me these items. Didn't mean, God forbid, coercive. It means, because the Torah says very clearly, it's from the generosity of someone's heart. Well, if you're talking about the generosity of someone's heart, then say, ask them to give it. Because that's clear, talking about people's generosity. It was according to someone's generosity. When someone's going to generosity, they make out a check to the charity. The charity doesn't take the check.
Well, also, what he's defining here is a free will offering as opposed to a mandated offering.
It's totally free. Yeah, yes. So what's the language of take? So one of the things that the commentaries notice, dwell on, say, take means that it's there already. Doesn't mean take as opposed to give. It means it's stuff that you have already. You don't have to go find it. It's, if someone says, I'm going to give you something, you say, come to my office, and I'll give it to you, or you can take it. Not that I have to go get it. So the inference is that all of these elements, those 13 elements that the Jews gave free will to the tabernacle, were things that they had in pocket, so to speak, in the pantry. So, and that's why also we find the whole idea that the word for it is called a truma. Truma it means like a tithe. But truma literally means an offering, a separation, something you set apart from your property as an offering for me. In other words, it's amongst your property, and you say, I'm taking this part and giving it to God. It's not something you have to go look for. So Rashi feels compelled to say that this is something they didn't have to go and buy the wood or find an acacia grove. They had it. They had all the elements that they needed for the tabernacle. They had it at the ready, and that even for the very smart but young uninitiated, they will say, why is that language there? The take. It says it's there to take because it's to let you know that they had it at the ready. So now let's get back to this. So what's Rashi's this thing he had? He said, actually, they had acacia trees at the ready. They knew they were going to need them. Let's dial it back. Rashi knew that acacia trees were not native to Egypt. He therefore insisted that Jacob planted them. He does not say that even that they brought them from Egypt. He brought them from Israel. He didn't even bring them as seeds. He brought them as trees. And text 6, we find from one of the greats, Jacob wanted the acacia trees to come from the Holy Land. It was going to be a holy tabernacle. It was going to be a holy dwelling place for God. You need these wood planks, these wood beams, as the basic structure of a holy temple. The basic structure, the guts of the holy temple should come from a holy land. So he brought them, not just the seeds, the trees from the Holy Land, from Israel to Egypt. He replanted them in Egypt so that they would have them hundreds of years later when they needed to go out, to be able to take the wood with them, because the trees Jacob brought would not have lasted all those years in Egypt had he not planted them. So Rashi, the tradition of the Medrash, Rabbi Tanchuma, is a tradition. And yes, it's off the normal run, and there are many things in the Medrash you could say, wow, that sounds miraculous. There's a lot of things there. That doesn't raise eyebrows for the Medrash student. That Rashi brings it raises the eyebrows. But he's telling the students something that I need you to understand, because the Torah shouts it by saying they had it at the ready. Yeah, they had wood at the ready. Why would slaves rushing to leave take things and they're told, take out the gold and silver with you, even though who needs that in the desert? Moses told them to take it. That we see scripturally. Why would they take wood with them? They took the wood with them because this was a tradition that the Jews had for hundreds of years in Egypt. Why are there acacia trees here? Dad, Mom, we're the only, it's only in our neighborhood in Goshen we have acacia trees. They're not native to Egypt. We have them because our ancestor Jacob said we would need them. And when we leave Egypt, we have to take wood with us. And here's from the Rebbe. When the children of Israel, in text number 7, when the children of Israel were in exile in Egypt, in a state of such terrific distress that the Egyptians cast every newborn into the river. If you remember, Pharaoh was killing every newborn boy. They were terribly oppressed. They were under unimaginable conditions. They were living in this pain day to day, but they drew comfort and consolation from seeing the acacia trees Jacob brought and planted in Egypt. The acacia trees were something that the Torah says they're going to need. They need it. Jacob knew in advance they're going to need it, so he brought them. Fine. That's a functional thing. The Rebbe is saying that there's something much deeper to this. And they don't mention it here. What he mentioned in the talk here, what did I say? What's the name of the rabbi who compiled these medrash? It's famous. It's very. He's a Talmudic rabbi. His medrash is very well respected. His name is Rabbi Tanchuma. Tanchuma. 1 second. That's good. Tanchuma comes in the that's Aramaic word name and word, and the Hebrew of it would be Tanchumen, which means consolation. What the Rebbe suggested and offered is that Rashi mentions Rabbi Tanchuma's name, which he doesn't usually, if he brings the Medrash, to say that the idea of bringing those trees was not just about having trees. It was to give strength and hope to the Jewish people. For hundreds of years, as their slaves, and they've lost hope, and they can't imagine getting out of this. And maybe some old grandmother or grandfather saying, but our patriarch Abraham and matriarch Sarah told us that one day we're going to be slaves and we will be freed. And maybe we heard it from Jacob too. And that becomes very difficult to believe. To feel in a tangible way, because look at the hell we're living in. To have those acacia trees, that was a source of comfort and consolation, a tanchumen, a consolation, from seeing the acacia trees Jacob brought and planted in Egypt. This was even more comforting than God's promise, I will bring you up to Israel, I will also bring you up. which is what God told Joseph. It was especially comforting to know that Jacob made this incredible effort because he prophesied that his children would build a tabernacle in the desert. He instructed his children, instructed the following generation to take them along when they left Egypt. So the acacia wood was an important building material for the tabernacle, but it wasn't only about the building material. They could have got it in their version of Home Depot. What the acacia wood also represented, and that Rashi's teaching us, is that it represented a tangible source of hope. These majestic trees were there in Egypt, and they were able to look at them, and they were kind of out of place because they don't usually have them in Egypt. And they were, from generation to generation, they said it was part of Jacob's promise that we were going to be leaving Egypt, and eventually God's going to tell us to build a tabernacle.
I believe acacia is also an aromatic wood.
That may be, yeah.
Which would make it even more desirable.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes. I don't think we know exactly how the agents are here in the scripture of it. It comes together with cedar, and it's not a cedar, but it seems like there was some type of a cedar in the cedar family that was like acacia. What? Yeah, because the Torah uses them both here. They made it simple, they just called it acacia. But if you want to drill down a little bit. Okay, 7b. Also from the Rebbe. Jews would behold with their physical eyes the trees that were transported from beyond Egypt, from Israel, which signifies redemption. This underscored for them that even during their time of bondage, they were not fully under the Egyptian thumb. They were under God's authority. Even when the Egyptian taskmaster was beating them and they felt totally vulnerable, for them to be able to look and see an acacia tree, it gave them strength and hope. They realized they were under not only Egyptian authority, but ultimately under God's authority, who promised, I will bring you up to Israel, I will also bring you up. They gave them hope that there would be an end to the misery. They would be liberated from Egypt, ascend to Israel, and bring these trees with them. So now, let's bring this a little closer to home. Our version of acacia trees. The Rebbe is saying, Jews are distraught over being in exile, even if they enjoy material and spiritual prosperity. If we have a mature view of the world, we see that there's a lot of pain. I must say that as a child and as a teenager, when the Rebbe would speak about Mashiach, I didn't see the need as much. Everybody in my family was pretty much was healthy. We're okay. We had what we needed, and I live in a good country. I knew we believe in Mashiach, but I didn't feel the drive. The Rebbe was crying for Mashiach. I understood. I didn't know. As I get older, you start seeing that there's a lot of pain in the world, and even if someone's in a position where they have physical and even spiritual comfort, one would hope they have the vision to see that it's a pained world in many quarters. So we're distraught over being in exile because a Jew's genuine desire is to experience the divine presence. And even as spiritually comfortable as a person may be, they're not living in a situation of like the temple would be, of total connectedness. This desire is rooted in the core of our spiritual being. And we're shaken to the core by the fact that the divine presence is not manifest today as it was when the temple stood in Jerusalem. This is something that should really bother us. And this was a very important motif of the Rebbe's, for us to not get too comfortable and with our own comfort and recognize that the world needs to change. Moreover, the following teachers from our sages should disturb us greatly. They taught us that we must regard the fact that the temple was not rebuilt during our lifetime as if it were destroyed in another lifetime. That's the Talmud makes a very strong statement. If the temple wasn't built in your lifetime, it's as if it was destroyed in your lifetime. Right? Why? Destruction of the temple was a horrible event, and it must have been horrible to witness. I saw 9/11. We saw this October 7th. I've seen the destruction, but to think that because I didn't see the temple rebuilt, that means it was destroyed in my lifetime. That the Talmud is asking for us to really ratchet up our sensitivity. Say the fact that today is another day where Mashiach has not come should bother us as though the temple were just destroyed today, that's not an instinctive thing. So, what is what's our place if we are feeling we're not in Egypt, thank God. We're not in slavery, thank God. We're not living through what they lived through, thank God. But we're living in our own exile. We need our acacia trees. So here the Talmud says, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, text 9, page 91. A righteous person does not pass away until a similarly righteous person is born. That's a quote of the Talmud. There's always some righteous people in you. As the passage states, the sun rises, the sun sets. It rises before it sets, and means before the sun sets. In other words, someone has passed on, another one has risen. Before the sun set on Eli, the high priest, Samuel the prophet from Ramah was born. In other words, God always ensures that there's righteous people in the world. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, another thing. God saw that there would be few perfectly righteous people, so he planted them in each generation. Planted, like a tree. As the passage states, for the pillars of the earth belong to God, he set the world upon them. So this is an idea that the Talmud tells us that it's always the righteous upon whom we can lean and we need for our inspiration and can help us be our best selves and give us hope that the pain we see is only temporary. And this is a verse in Isaiah talking about Mashiach. Says, your teacher shall no longer be concealed from you, your eyes shall see your teacher. In other words, the idea of us recognizing 10 that we have the ability to see the goodness in the world and see even before the Mashiach comes. Really, this idea is that we all have within us. We have genes of Abraham and Sarah. We have a part of our soul, which is a Moses, which is a Mashiach. And if we can find a righteous person to study from, we absolutely should. Meanwhile, also, we want to be able to see, not conceal our own best selves from ourselves. And that is our acacia tree. There's a part of us which remains an acacia tree that God planted within us to make sure that we can find hope even in difficult times. In text 11, we find a quote from one of the great Hasidic leaders, not a Rebbe, but in the early years of Chabad. He said, the destruction of the temple did not cause the divine presence to be concealed from perfectly righteous Jews. My teacher, Rabbi Isaac Epstein of Hummel, said in the name of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Ladi, that for lofty souls, such as Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai of the Medrash, the temple was not destroyed. What does that mean? The temple was destroyed. But the idea is that we can see the world in a different key. There's a story, I mentioned it before, I'm pretty sure. There's a Hasidic group called Ger. They're quite big in Israel and Borough Park, Ger, G-E-R in the English. And when the Ger Rebbe came to after the war, he escaped. He survived the Holocaust. I believe his entire family was killed. and he came to Tel Aviv. And the story is told that one of his followers, who lost his entire family, was struggling with just existing day to day, didn't know what to do. And finally, he went to see the Rebbe, and he said to him, "How do you exist? How do you put one foot in front of the other?" And the Rebbe started to cry, and they cried together. And the Rebbe said to him, the Ger Rebbe said to him, when Moses tells the Jews at the end of his life, he recounts their history, and he says, "I came down the mountain with the tablets of the Ten Commandments, and I saw you dancing with a golden calf, which is a terrible tragedy." And he says, "And I threw down the tablets, and I broke them before your eyes." So the Ger Rebbe said, "What do you mean before your eyes?" He broke them. You were dancing. I came down. I broke the tablets. They saw it. Of course, they saw it. Or they didn't see it. What's the before your eyes? The Ger Rebbe said that Moses was telling them that the destruction we see in the world is not an absolute destruction. There's even the tablets. Moses was saying to them, the tablets were broken, but they are whole in a higher dimension. The Ten Commandments and the tablets as God gave them to me, they are whole. I broke them before your eyes in human experience, but I didn't break them fundamentally. I just lost two parents physically. That's a real world thing. They were buried. I don't think that they're gone. They're not only as a memory. I think that there's an objective presence of the souls being there, all souls. So there is this idea of looking at something and recognizing, yes, in the real world, there was a destruction. That's why we have to sit Shiva, and that's why there's a Tisha B'Av. But that didn't get to the soul of what was going on, the soul of the temple. And for people who have vision, they can see past the physical destruction and actually be able to sense in a real way the spiritual wholeness. And that's what he's saying here. That for lofty souls like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai of the Talmud, the temple was not destroyed. Of course it was destroyed. But if what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was able to see was the soul, it was alive before and after. The soul of the temple was alive before and after. The soul of the human being was alive before and after. And that's what we're saying here, is that there is a sense that we can find even within ourselves to be able to see past the destruction of the world in which we live, to be able to find the wholeness that's still there. And if you look at text 12 from the Rebbe, seeing the proverbial trees planted by our forefather Jacob in every generation is comforting. The trees in every generation, those trees are gone. But the trees, Jacob planted them in every generation. These trees are untouched by the spiritual desolation of exile, yet they're visible to us. They empower us to not succumb to the spiritual darkness of exile, rather to overcome it. Jacob, in bringing down trees, not seeds, trees from Israel to replant in Egypt, to be able to see as pillars of hope that become the guts of the tabernacle, it wasn't just about a historical thing. He was setting the path forward for our lives to say there's always those trees. Conceptually, they're always going to be with you. You can always find acacia woods. You can always find my holy acacia wood, the acacia trees, if you look within yourself. With this strength, we merit being fully consoled in actual and real consolation. After this long and final exile, the only possible consolation is a true and complete redemption. And that's so the Rebbe used to constantly push that we need a Mashiach to be able to actually change this world, so there's no more pain and suffering and misunderstanding and illness. The literal arrival of our righteous Redeemer on terra firma in this world speedily in our days. Then we add another element here. Page 13, this is the final one. This is something we find in Jewish spiritual writings. Every soul in the world was included in the collective soul of Adam. So Adam and Eve were collective souls. In general, Adam's soul was divisible into 613 elements, representing 248 organs and 365 sinews. What it means there is that there's 613 is represented as the mitzvahs of the Torah, 248 positive, 365 prohibitions. Our rabbis tell us that there are 248 organs also and 365 different types of sinews. More specifically, the soul was divisible into innumerable sparks. We're all sparks of Adam's soul. Now, Jacob's spiritual beauty resembled Adam's spiritual beauty. The Talmud tells us that Jacob resembled Adam. This means that, like Adam, Jacob's soul was comprised of also comprised all the Jewish souls. Thus, God's infinite light shines openly into the souls of all those who follow Jacob's example, upright of heart, engage in Torah study and mitzvah observance. This divine radiance is strongest and most intense in their minds and hearts during prayer. So prayer is a time for us to connect with God, connect with Jacob, to connect with our greats, really to connect with that within ourselves, and to be able to visualize within ourselves our connection with eternity, our connection with the spirituality beyond the destruction, our connection with what we have as our conceptual acacia trees. So that is the Rebbe's takeaway from that Rashi. So let's look at key points. The Jews used acacia wood for the tabernacle, which Jacob prophetically planted in Egypt. That's what the Medrash tells us, and Rashi quotes. Rashi accepts this seemingly fantastical explanation to reconcile how the wood was readily available, because Rashi feels forced. It was readily available. How did they have wood? They had wood because you see that it was something that Jacob had already prepared hundreds of years before. Even though that's definitely a fantastic tale, but it's something we believe, and it explained. It allows the Torah to flow. They take it as though it was ready. Number 3, Jacob's trees were a tangible reminder of hope and redemption for the enslaved Jews in Egypt. Number 4, like Jacob's trees, righteous people in every generation are planted as reminders of God's presence and redemption. Number 5, each Jew possesses a spark of Jacob's holiness, which can be accessed through Torah, mitzvahs, and prayer. And finally, number 6, by connecting to our inner spark, we can experience moments of spiritual redemption, even in exile. Okay, so that is our Torah Rashi study for today. The main takeaway being that even Jacob was trying to prepare his children, prepare us as people for the future, knowing we're going to go through hard times, to be able to have something to hold on to keep our hope alive. Whether it was, yes. Someone say something? Maybe not. Okay. Those Rebbe, using the different sources, is encouraging us to find that hope and those quote unquote those acacia trees within ourselves, so that because every one of us has within our souls has that capacity for finding that sturdy hope of the acacia tree. Right?
Sounds good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Okay.
Rabbi.
Okay, be well. Have a great week.
Thank you.